sure this is looking good. How's it going? Can you guys hear us? Let us know in the comments if you guys can hear us or not, and where you're from. I'm gonna try to monitor you guys from the other screen. Looks like we have already a bunch of people in here. Put the comments in live chat. Afternoon even. Thingy Mabob says. Charlie Manson, hello, hello. Where are you guys from? Can you guys hear us okay? Oh yeah, we're good. You see everything. You see everything.
Sweden.
Hello Sweden. Hey, how må du? Good morning. Hello from Switzerland.
Schweizer.
Romania. Phnom Penh, USA. What does that mean? What is Phnom Penh, USA?
UK.
Czech, Arizona.
Ahoy.
Anaheim, nice. South Africa, South Africa. The High Mars is in Kyiv,
From Kyiv.
from the US, now in Kyiv. What else? Yorkshire Oblast. Who we got? Orange County, California. Yeah, I went to school there. Plus Plus by Cheryl. Hello, hello.
Oblast of Maine.
Thank you for always helping out. Oblast of Maine. Is that like the suburbs of Maine? Could be, I guess.
Berlin, willkommen.
Germany, Guten Morgen. Auf geht's. Well, guys, hello. Thank you so much for coming on, joining us in the stream. And Scott, thank you for agreeing to come on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
What made you agree to do the stream?
So I moved here to Kyiv in 2019 to do a master's degree, Tarasovchenko University. Doing my thesis on the effects of media and propaganda on the conflict, and we're starting to see that start to have effects on people. And I think in the U.S. and some other countries, as we start to move into election seasons, I think it's probably important right now more than ever to dispel some of these myths that are out there.
So actually, before being through all this, I never voted. I never thought it mattered that much, but it clearly does, right? Okay.
It's one of your fundamental rights as an American citizen, get out and vote.
Okay. Well, today we're going to be dispelling some of the myths. I asked in the community chat for the subscribers and the patrons, or not patrons, the members, if anyone had any questions. But also, if you want to ask any questions here, if you have time, we'll get to that. But the kind of the most common one that I heard from everyone that they want to answer is actually, does Russian propaganda actually work? Or people, because it actually, from my point of view, the only people who are, believing in Russian propaganda, they just, hate whatever the other side is doing. So they just use this as a reason to, to sway voters from the left to the right or the right to the left. Like, why do we need to spend all this energy fighting Russian propaganda or dispelling it? Isn't it better just to ignore it?
Yeah, I mean, if we could. If it didn't have any effects, it'd be great just to ignore it. So when I look at these things, I know I mentioned that it's important to dispel these things as we go into election seasons, but I really look at this problem set apolitically. Because of my background, I don't tend to look at things basically through political lenses. Russian propaganda works very much. It's actually in February 2013 when General Gerasimov put out his hybrid warfare theory, talked a lot about the effects of propaganda. In fact, we know it works because Hitler was famous for saying you only need three things to win a war: propaganda, propaganda, and propaganda. So it does work. It does have psychological effects. I mean, we talked about it before we started streaming. We're starting to see elected politicians in the U.S. repeat, Russian propaganda talking points. And when they repeat it, their constituents listen to it. And as we've seen over and over again, it doesn't have to be true. People believe in the States. We have a big problem with people looking for confirmation bias. They look for people who say things they want to hear, whether they're right or not. So it can be very, very effective.
Okay. I'm going to talk like indirectly in the mic because he's wearing it. Yeah, I think that when Russian propagandists or bots tweet on Twitter or on Facebook their misinformation, it doesn't actually do anything. But when normal people or politicians start parroting it, that's when it becomes destructive. And that's what we're seeing now.
Absolutely. And we, I don't want to turn this into, I have to give examples. So I have to give examples using politics. I don't want to make this a political discussion. We've talked about a couple times now, Tucker Carlson. He's a former Fox News employee. Now he tweets on Twitter, has a massive following, and he says things that are just factually untrue. But I've had people repeat those things to me. I have, despite my background and despite me living here, I have friends of mine that have known me for over 2 decades arguing with me about what's going on in Ukraine because of what Tucker Carlson said. And for me, just looking at it, just in general, that's just insane. And so propaganda, it does have effects, and that's part of the huge issue now as we keep moving further into the 21st century. These social media platforms allow people, like I said earlier, you can just send out one tweet and have it reach tens of millions of people. And even if it only has a 10% effectiveness, look how many people you just got to believe that propaganda.
Yeah, very true, very good. So let's just jump straight in. The hot topic, at least this week, and I feel like it changes all the time, is border security. First off, does that have anything to do with what we're doing in Ukraine? Can the government not fund both?
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with Ukraine. These types of arguments I see are, they're emotional arguments. They're arguments that people make just to basically draw an emotional response. And I will talk specifically about border security, but to give another example, in the States you hear, why are we giving money to Ukraine when we have veterans on the street? I myself am a veteran. I believe in helping the veterans. That has nothing to do with what's going on in Ukraine. The money that's strictly coming to Ukraine is out of the National Defense Authorization Act. It's out of the defense budget, and that would not be the same money used on the border in the States. It's not the same money used, for homeless veterans or anything like that. So
what about Hawaii?
So same thing. So in the States, when the government collects taxes, it spends them in 3 categories: mandatory, discretionary, and emergency, or there's another term they use for emergency. But the National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the money coming to Ukraine, is out of discretionary funding. Money going to people in Hawaii would be out of the emergency funding. Yes, people in Hawaii should be getting a lot more money. I mean, we should be helping them. It doesn't come out of this money. And something else you have to realize, the U.S. government runs on fiscal years, October 1st to September 30th. So the money right now going to Ukraine was passed and was put into effect a year ago today, last October. So, that money is already allocated, it's already set aside, it's already, basically allocated. So the events that happen in Hawaii and stuff, those would come out of the emergency funding set aside, so it's completely different.
Yeah, so as far as I know, the money that's going to Ukraine is coming out of the defense budget. Mm-hmm. And currently, it's way less than 10% of the annual U.S. defense budget.
Yeah, so the defense budget for the fiscal year 20, I haven't even looked at 24 yet. Fiscal year 23 was $868 billion, just for math purposes, we'll say $900 billion. And they're estimating about $130 billion has went to Ukraine. The problem with that is, and we've talked about this at length too, a lot of the things we've sent to Ukraine are old things that we had in stocks. One example I like to give is the 85 M113 troop transport vehicles we sent. We retired those in the 60s. Those were bought and paid for budgets from before when either of us were even born. And so it's kind of disingenuous to say over 50% of the things that we've given Ukraine as far as equipment come out of our old stocks. So it's pretty disingenuous to say that these things are coming out of this year's defense budget when it was paid for by budgets, 40, 50 years ago. So the numbers, when you really drill down into the numbers, they don't make sense.
So as far as I know, most military equipment and ammunition has a shelf life.
Yep.
And if we're giving Ukraine things that have been sitting for 20, 30, 40 years, and we're selling it to them for the full price that we paid for it, or maybe even how they, I guess it almost doesn't matter, but are they pricing it as, if we were to buy that new today, it would be worth this much?
Yeah, they don't, whenever they say we're giving a defense package to Ukraine worth this much. They don't give based on depreciated value. It's a value at the time they paid for it then. They might round it up now. I'm not sure how they do that. The problem with that is, it's just, so the problem, as you brought up, the stuff that sits in storage has a shelf life. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. A Stinger missile has a shelf life of about 10 years, and to decommission a Stinger costs about $10,000. So all this stuff has shelf lives. The 155 rounds, the big howitzer rounds have to be in temperature controlled storage, things like that. Why let that stuff go to waste and then, or let it hit its shelf life and then pay a company to decommission it when we could just send it to Ukraine? Most of the money that through the defense budget, when we send them the old stuff, we're replacing that with new stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we're just getting rid of it. If we weren't giving that to Ukraine, the defense budget for FY23 was only $500 million more than FY22. So it's not like we massively increased the budget to cover money going to Ukraine. So even if we weren't sending that stuff to Ukraine, we'll still be buying all this with the defense budget and just putting it in storage and stockpiles. And the fact that we have stockpiles of stuff from the 60s, we should be modernizing, modernizing the force modernization.
So it's actually helping the U.S. get stronger because we have modern equipment. We're replacing it with modern equipment instead of having old stuff that may or not have a long shelf life.
Absolutely. I've got friends of mine who are commanders of National Guard units, and when they were sending the 155 howitzers over here, they come to my friend and they say, hey, out of your stocks, we need 2 howitzers to send over. Do you think they're going to give up their 2 best howitzers? No, they're going to give their 2 worst because they know the government's going to replace them. So we talked about this in person the other day. So last year when the invasion kicked off, FY22, the defense budget was already passed, so there was no money for Ukraine, so the government had to do a supplemental. And the first supplemental they did was $40 billion. Out of that $40 billion, $9 billion went straight to the U.S. military to buy new equipment. Another $9 billion went for presidential drawdown authority, which means he could draw down $9 billion out of existing stocks, send to Ukraine, and then use that $9 billion to replace. So we've been modernizing our force. And people complain about the military-industrial complex. I love that. That's what helps people in the U.S. sleep at night. But that also creates jobs, so it's also helping our economy. So we are modernizing our force.
So actually, that's a good point. I used to think that it was just a couple of fat cats that worked for these big defense companies that got rich, but actually it helps the U.S. economy grow as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, defense industry is big, and the people that work in those factories, those are not minimum wage jobs. Those are good jobs.
Yeah, and actually, I didn't even realize this until the other day. I looked it up. That in my 401k, just like the default, and for you guys, if you guys are invested in like the S&P 500, that's invested in a lot of those military companies.
Absolutely, yep.
So your retirement fund is going up because the U.S. is spending money on these defense contractors, and a lot of them is like companies like Honeywell, which also probably make your air conditioner.
The Honeywell makes the engine for the M1 Abram, so yeah, they make and air conditioners as well. So yeah, it feeds the economy. I don't see anything wrong with it. Like I said, we would be spending the money. The money's in the budget regardless. If you go back and look at the defense budget from since 1960 even, it systematically increases every year. There's a couple of years where it's a little bit less than the year before, but it keeps going up every year. So I don't think there's this myth, if we weren't sending money to Ukraine, we would be taking the money out and using it for something else because it's already allocated for the defense budget.
All right, well, thank you for debunking that myth. Next big question that people were asking. This one I almost didn't want to answer because I normally just try to ignore these trolls, but because we have you on and you can probably speak intelligently on this better than I can. This guy's asking, he's like, how come Russia can't attack Ukraine for encroaching on their borders when he says when the U.S. was ready to go to war against Cuba and Russia for them putting nuclear missiles in Cuba.
Yeah,
is it not the same thing?
I don't think it's, well, number one, I mean, I don't usually do hyperbolic arguments, whataboutisms. You can quote me on this. I always say whataboutisms are the chosen argument of the intellectually impotent. But, well, if you're going to use the Cuban Missile Crisis, as an example, Russia was wanting to store. This was before my time, not an expert on this, but from my understanding, Russia was wanting to put missiles in Cuba right there, nuclear missiles. Were we trying to put nuclear missiles in Ukraine or anything like that? It's not the same. And you're talking about encroaching on borders. Go back and look at a map of Russia in 1471 and look at a map of Russia now. Russia always has, they always blame their expansion on their fear of being invaded. And it's like for me telling a police officer, well, I punched him in the face because I thought maybe he was going to hit me first. That's just not a logical argument. And in fact, when Russia is constantly saying they're afraid they're going to be invaded, they went into Georgia. They, look what they did in Chechnya, Grozny. They did the same thing. Transnistria, they do all these things. They encroach on these other people's borders, and at the same time, they portray themselves as victims.
Yeah, and I think another big difference is the U.S. Warns countries and say, don't put your missiles there or we will attack you. While Russia did the exact opposite, where they're like, oh, everything's okay. No, we're just doing a training exercise. Like, we're not invading Ukraine. The U.S. is lying. Their intelligence is bad. We're not invading Ukraine. And then they, backstab and just do it anyways.
Every year, so there's, is it Vostok? I'm trying to think of the name of the big military exercise in Russia. And usually at the end of the exercise every year, they have troops on the border with Ukraine as part of their exercise. And when it ended 2 years ago in October, we noticed they didn't pull troops back. In fact, they were starting to pull more troops. Then I see they start bringing in blood supplies, setting up field hospitals, and it's like that is not part of training. Those are things that those are things you simulate during the exercises. And so I could see right through that. And even after the invasion, when they were trying to come to Kyiv, they caught some of the POWs, and they had documents on them where Putin had signed the okay to go ahead and come into Russia as he was sitting on TV telling the international community, or come into Ukraine. He'd already signed that, and then later he's sitting there on TV telling people he's not going to invade. So I don't believe anything that comes out of Russia or the Kremlin.
Prior to February 24th, 2022, the full-scale invasion, I wanted to give Russia and Putin the benefit of the doubt. And I thought, some of their, their arguments before they actually invaded, I'm like, okay, yeah, bring that to the negotiating table. If you want to flex your army and your troops on the border, that gives you a little bit of strength for the negotiating table. They could have gotten everything they wanted. Ever since they actually invaded, everything changed, obviously. But the thing that really, to me, debunked their argument about their fear of NATO expansion is when Finland and Sweden wanted to join NATO, and Russia was like, we don't care.
I gotta say, for making light of a bad situation, but for all the negative things Russia done, it's been NATO's biggest champion of the last year. It's helped NATO increase. NATO had, people wondered if NATO had outlived its usefulness. Was it a relic of the Cold War? It didn't need to exist. People weren't paying their share. It wasn't as cohesive as they thought. It has solidified NATO, and there's a couple of outliers. We have problems with Turkey and Hungary, and it's all politically biased, basically. But like I said, we've expanded NATO. Who just joined? Sweden, and now Finland.
So Finland
officially
joined. NATO's going to,
and then Sweden's getting ready to join.
Yeah.
I keep getting those backwards. So, Russia's helped NATO expand. So if the one thing that Putin uses as an excuse is to try to counter NATO expansion, he's done just the opposite. Not only did he put Russia proper, basically right up against NATO's border, if he comes on into Poland, he just helped two more countries, or 1.5 potentially, to join NATO. So.
And it's not like NATO is asking them to join, poaching them.
No.
These countries are begging, saying we want to protect ourselves against Russia because we're afraid Russia is going to attack.
Yeah, Putin always talks about NATO expansion, and I say that too. It's like countries don't go out and recruit. Countries ask to join, and like you said, you hit the nail on the head. It's 9 times out of 10, well, 10 times out of 10, it's to counter Russian aggression.
So we got a question from the live chat. Scroman says, hello, Johnny. Not sure if you guys already answered this, but the U.S. Army has 200,000 Humvees, but has sent Ukraine very few. Why do you think that is? Because obviously Ukraine needs cars, right? We just fundraised for a convoy of 15 pickup trucks, Why isn't the U.S. government giving the Humvees and giving the Jeeps? Like, why is it mostly civilian donations right now?
I don't know, man. I've got to tell you, I'm not. I'll be honest. I'm not as happy with U.S. I am happy U.S. is supporting. I'm not as. You've talked about the kind of the trickle effect, or the slow drip. I think we should have given them a lot more at the beginning to basically conduct decisive operations. This slow bleed, this thinking that we're going to, wear Russia out. It's tough on all the countries' supplies. It's tough on the world economy. So I can't answer why we haven't given them more. I know, there's we're giving the Bradleys, other countries are giving like the Martyrs. So it's not just the U.S. It's quite a few. There's 50 countries now supporting, and so it's strange for me to look at. It's strange when I look at the whole operational picture. Ukraine is, fighting with a big mishmash of stuff. They have, vehicles from almost 50 different countries, 4 or 5 different tanks on the battlefield. And the problem is you have to have the logistical supplies to sustain all those. And it's difficult enough to sustain if you have one type of tank. But now if you've got 4 different tanks, you have 4 different, basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Logistic points set up because they don't use the same equipment, when you need to repair them and things like that. Some of them may not even use the same type of fuel or use the same type of ammunition. So it's tough when you have all these different types of vehicles out there.
That makes sense. Another question is, why does the U.S. even care about what happens to Ukraine? Shouldn't Europe, because they're on the border, worry about them?
Yeah, so what's funny is go on Google and type in World War II protests, and you'll see the exact same thing. Putin or Hitler didn't invade us, so why should we care? Lend-Lease just cost British lives. We already tried that argument. It's the same thing as in World War II. We're seeing fascism basically try to spread across Europe again. The big problem I have, Medvedev. So he's the former president of Russia. He's a former prime minister, and now he's a still member of the State Duma, the Congress. And is he head of Putin's party in the Duma? So even today, UK announced it was going to start sending British troops to Ukraine to train Ukrainians on the soil. And Medvedev came straight out and said, then they're going to be legitimate military targets. He said, as are German factories that are producing the Taurus missiles is sin. So he's already saying that Russia has the right to strike targets in Germany. Prior to this, Medvedev already said Poland is up next for denazification. They've already talked about, and once they get finished, then they're going to keep going to the west, to Poland. Those are NATO countries. That's Article 5. If Article 5 is triggered, then that puts all NATO countries in a direct hot war with Russia. And so if we're able to stop Russia where it is, then we can avoid a further conflict. In addition, Russia is a member of the United Nations. I think it was kicked out of the Security Council, but it's a member of the United Nations. As a member, you're supposed to abide by the charter and not, move into other sovereign territories. So it's violated its UN charter 7 times, I believe now. So just on principle, I mean, we are a rules-based society. Look at the big superpowers. We have the power to destroy the planet over and over and over, but we live in a rules-based society. And if you don't have those rules and people don't follow those rules, then it becomes a really scary place to live.
Agreed. WL, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please ask us in the live chat. Actually, you answered someone else's question. They said, if Ukraine falls, who's next?
That's scary. Yeah. We're seeing, the attacks, the Russians attacking the ports down in Odessa along the Danube River. So they're putting a lot of their strikes right on the border, right across the river, literally from Romania. We saw last year with some missile fragments, even though they end up being Ukrainian, because they were trying to shoot down a Russian missile, some missile fragments landed in Poland. It's pretty scary because as Russia starts to run out of a lot of their smart weapons, we say, they're firing a lot of these older stock weapons, and they don't have the precision. And if one of those, goes across the border, yeah, I don't want to think about it. I mean, it could get pretty bad pretty quick.
Yeah, I think NATO's been pretty cautious about invoking Article 5. I think they're saying it needs to be a direct attack on NATO or a non-accidental attack. I really believe that the U.S. and NATO countries have been really trying not to get involved as much as they can, but they also don't want to see Ukraine fall, because if Ukraine fell and nobody helped them, I think that would encourage other countries to do the same thing, such as China taking Taiwan.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's the other thing I didn't bring up when you asked, why we care. Like you said, China's watching this right now because of their potential incursions into Taiwan. This kind of us holding back Russia serves as a deterrent with Iran going into Israel, North Korea into South Korea. So, this is where it gets scary. So this is where the coalition resolve needs to stay strong, because if we start backing out and not giving our support to Ukraine, then Putin, he can say, okay, it worked. All we have to do is wait it out. Then other countries do the same thing. They think if they go in and there's a NATO or another country tries to support, all they have to do is just wait it out, and eventually they'll get tired. We've seen, and I'm talking from as an American perspective, so let me know if you see this in the other countries too. We saw at the very beginning, when the first days of the invasion, we saw the missiles hitting the building, we saw the bodies in Bucha, and the whole world watched in horror. And it's not like that anymore. Like when this first started, nobody was talking about, money. Nobody was talking about, we shouldn't be sending weapons. It was just like, hey, that shouldn't be happening. That stuff's still happening. Not here in Kyiv, but out in the east. That stuff is still happening on the FLOT, the forward line of troops, along the line of contact. So, our people have short attention spans, but we have to make sure, as a collective, as the coalition, supporting Ukraine, our attention span doesn't waver, and we still continue to give that support.
So actually a common question is, as time goes on and people get tired of helping Ukraine, what would happen? So, and some people actually think that Ukraine would just stop fighting, but living here, I know for a fact that Ukraine would continue fighting, just it would become bloodier.
It will. So this is where if all the countries stop giving NATO, or if all the countries stop giving Ukraine support, and they didn't have the weaponry they do now to hold off Russia, Russia does have a larger force, has more equipment, it would come in. Ukraine, you're right, would not stop fighting, but then they would transition to basically a counterinsurgency, like we saw in the Middle East. So Ukraine won't stop fighting, but that's pretty much what it will devolve into.
I think that'd be worse for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to run counterinsurgency operations, you're supposed to have a ratio of 5 to 1, which we talked about this the other day. Russia didn't even follow its own doctrine when it came in. Usually, if you're on the offensive, you want to attack with a 3 to 1 overmatch. They tried to take a country of almost 40 million with 190,000 people, and so I talked about this with some colleagues. Like if they actually did make it all the way to Kyiv, they didn't even with 190,000, they didn't have enough people in that 190,000 to conduct counterinsurgency operations, even within the city of Kyiv itself, let alone the rest of the country. So they would have to have so many people to conduct counterinsurgency operations. It'd be a larger drain on manpower and the Russian economy as well. And that's kind of what we're all looking for right now is at what point does Putin just kind of give up and say the losses that are being incurred by Russia, whether it's politically, economically, manpower, when does it hit the critical point where it's just not worth it anymore for him?
Agreed. In the chat, Michael Miller asks something about the U.S. House vote to keep the budget going. Is anyone worried about Ukraine funding being added, not being added?
No. So what they just passed a continuing resolution, and I forgot whether it was 60 days or 90 days. Funding for Ukraine wasn't in that within that budget. I think this is going to be a political football for a while. I don't care who gets elected. No, I'm not saying I don't care who gets elected. Whoever is elected president, funding for Ukraine is not going to stop. Even though there are political talking points on both sides, it's going to continue. Boris Johnson said the same thing about England the other day. It really doesn't matter who gets elected. They're still going to continue to support. It might be diminished a little bit, but then again, I think we could have given Ukraine better weapons, more longer range weapons, more precise weapons, and not had to give them as many. So, maybe we're just going to transition with the type of things we're giving them as well.
Okay. here's my personal thought. I don't know if this is right or wrong or not. I'm just curious your thoughts on this. I actually think that the reason why the U.S. and the West isn't giving Ukraine everything is one of two things. One is, I mean, I guess it could just be they don't want to provoke Russia, right? And they're like, okay, we'll just slowly push it and see what Russia does. But aside from that, I actually think that the West enjoys seeing Russia bleed, and they want Russia to go home by themselves with a bloody nose instead of, you know, forcing them to go home in a body bag. Because even though we hate Putin, we would actually rather see the stability of him just calling off the war and saying, okay, guys, it's over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, I've read countless, you know, studies done on, you know, would Russia be better off without Putin? You know, it's kind of like the adage, or, you know, hey, what if we just go in and take Putin out? Well, you know, if Putin were to vacate, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, the Russian Constitution states that they have to have new elections in 90 days. So during that time, the current prime minister takes over as president. I think in those first 90 days, Russia's going to just devolve into chaos. You would probably have military coups. You'd have oligarchs vying for power. You're going to have groups like Wagner, a place like this. I mean, it would just turn into a total, you know, S show. So, and, you know, so a lot of people, when they kind of looked at this analytically, they kind of came to the conclusion, you know, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
All right. John, thank you very much for the Corona. I don't know how much that is, but Tucson Talk says Ukraine can't fall. Russia's holding on in panic right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, me personally, I think Putin's a walking dead man. Mm-hmm. You know, they, and that's the thing that, you know, we talked about too. So a loss at this stage for Putin is political death, and it being in Russia is just, you know, physical death too. And so that's kind of scary, thinking if a person, you know, he's facing his end, at what extremes is he going to go to? And where you talked about, we want to, you know, they kind of want to slow walk because they don't want to cross, you know, provoke Russia. Yeah, how many red lines were drawn? You know, it was a red line if you send this, we sent this. A red line, you know, F-16s, we sent F-16s. Red lines, you send HIMARS, and now it's ATACMS. And so Russia keeps drawing these red lines, but it's just kind of like they're bluffing. And so, yeah, I think Russia's in panic mode as well.
Yeah. I don't remember the name of it, but I know that during the fall of the USSR, Ukraine gave up some of their nuclear weapons, or all the nuclear weapons.
Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah. And in turn, I guess it was the U.S., Russia, and
UK.
And the UK gave was it a security guarantee, like to Ukraine? Like, are we obligated actually, you know, to protect Ukraine for in exchange for them giving up their nukes?
I don't know if we're legally obligated. You know, Russia violated the same thing. They were signatories as well. I think we're morally obligated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ukraine had the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, you know, after they fall, and they gave them up under the auspice of, you will come to our aid if we need it, just like you said. Okay. So I think we're definitely morally obligated.
I would imagine also that if we didn't keep our word, other countries wouldn't trust us. So,
yeah, true.
You know, if we ever went to like Iran or someone and said, give up your, you know, or North Korea, it's like, give up your nukes. We're not going to attack you. We'll protect you. And if they say, well, you didn't protect Ukraine.
Oh, very true. Yeah. That's a good point.
Okay. So I guess we are obligated. Ohms mentioned that as well. Thank you, Ohms. Question for you is, what is a piece of like Russian propaganda or talking point that you hear over and over and over again that you just wish, you know, people would just understand? Is BS.
Nazis.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there's so many. You know, one of the Nazi when the cracks. That's a long conversation. So during the Maidan Revolution, you know, this was in 2014. November 2013 to February 2014, there was the big Maidan Revolution, known as the Revolution of Dignity. Basically, if you want to know what happened, watch Winter on Fire. Great
Yeah.
documentary.
Very good.
Do not watch Ukraine on Fire. That came out the next year. Oliver Stone was paid by the Russian government to put that out as a counter. Don't watch that piece of garbage. So basically, there was a grassroots uprising of the people in Ukraine to basically oust a pro-Russian president after he basically signed a deal to align with Russia after promising align with the EU and the West. So one of the big propaganda points I always hear is that was a CIA-backed coup, CIA-led coup. And that came straight out of the Kremlin. And you have to understand, in the Soviet Union and even in modern day Russia, they don't believe in fundamental rights of the people. Putin does not believe in the power of protest. He does not believe that a government would fundamentally change the way it operates because of a populist uprising, the people uprising. Therefore, the only logical conclusion would be that had to be a coup orchestrated by the West and most likely the CIA. So that's how that rumor got started.
I mean, they had photos of some American giving out cookies during this protest, and
I think I missed that.
and they said like it must have been some of those cookies.
Yeah,
But-
something in the cookies. That's what it was.
Okay, so here's actually the hardest thing about misinformation or Russian propaganda is they always kind of try to find some kind of like little tiny speck of truth.
Yes.
Okay,
The person just wrote about Victoria Nuland. Say that again. I'm sorry, finish your thought.
Victoria Nuland.
I want to talk about that.
Okay. So they'll say the U.S. was watching the coup to see what happened, and the U.S. Wanted a pro-Western president.
Mhm.
Therefore, the U.S. meddled, and it's like the U.S. watches everything. I mean, you used to work as an intelligence officer. I would imagine you guys have your eyeballs and at least one or two people on the ground everywhere in the world that could potentially be a big deal to U.S. security. But to say that the U.S. swayed or somehow orchestrated 40 million people
Yeah.
to want to go against Russia,
Yeah.
it's actually at first it's stupid, but it's also an insult to Ukrainians.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The Ukrainians are not stupid people, and to sway 40 million Ukrainians to choose your side just because you handed out free cookies or you somehow, what could the CIA even do to get 40 million people to vote for their guy?
I don't know. And I mean, you're right. It is insulting because Yanukovych, even though he signed that trade deal with Russia, he campaigned on a platform of pro-Western and pro-NATO, pro-Western integration, EU integration. And at the last minute, when he was supposed to sign a deal with the EU, he turned around and signed a long-term deal with Russia. That's what the people exploded over. So it's nothing that the CIA did.
No, wait, yeah. So you can answer this, but thank you for the super chat. Melissa Noble says there is an actual recording of Victoria Nuland speaking with the U.S. officials, picking out the new leader of Ukraine. How's that propaganda?
Yeah, so this is, I'll explain exactly how that's propaganda. So yes, there is a recording of Victoria Nuland, and if you ever work in foreign policy, you'll realize these type of conversations go on quite a bit, talking with her assistant on which pro-Western candidate they wanted to back for a certain position. So yes, those conversations happen all the time. Here not too far from my apartment, we have the America House. It's like this cultural center that helps promote democracy and Western ideas. So they were talking about who they wanted to put their support behind, and the two names they put out were Klitsch and Yats. Klitschko was, as you know, is now the mayor. Yatsuk was elected after the presidential election, was elected as the prime minister. So they didn't pick what they say, the leader of Ukraine. That would have been Petro Poroshenko, the president. The Congress in Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada, picks and then what they vote to confirm the prime minister. That's how the prime minister was elected. So now you're trying to say that this was back before the pro-Russian parties were expelled from Congress. So you had pro-Russian parties in the Congress. So you're trying to say that Victoria Nuland somehow got every member of the Rada to vote for the prime minister to include the pro-Russian people in Congress? That doesn't make sense. So it wasn't the leader, it was the prime minister, it wasn't the president.
So that was a good point. I think we had mentioned this earlier. The U.S. always has who they would rather win. I mean, I'm sure in every country in the world, we'll look and be like, okay, South Africa's having elections. Who would we rather, have be the next president? It doesn't mean we have any control over it.
Yeah.
And I think if we do try to sway something, our push is, even though the U.S. has a lot of money, I would imagine like a 1% sway, maybe. But when you're talking about 40 million people, like that's a handful of people versus everyone else is like, you know what, I don't care what what you guys want. Like we're gonna vote for who we want.
Yeah.
We're our own country.
I mean, that's like I said, the U.S., they want to promote Western style democracy, so they put their backing behind pro-Western style, candidates. Yeah. I'm sure Russia was doing the same thing with, pro-Russian style candidates. All the countries do that.
Yeah, 100%. But thank you for the donation anyway to get your question out there. But it was good for people to hear it, because I can see why somebody would hear that recording.
That one gets used quite a bit, yeah.
I've heard it and I was like, this is them talking about who they would rather win. I'm sure you and your buddies talk about who you would rather win the Super Bowl or the upcoming the World Cup right now that's happening.
That's right.
Like it doesn't mean you have any sway.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, in foreign policy, that's just, you have those conversations. You have to decide, hey, what candidate running aligns with our values, and we're going to put our support behind to try to help that candidate get elected. That's just normal foreign policy. That's just normal politics. We do the same thing in the States. You as a voter do the same thing in the States.
By the way, so right now is the Rugby World Cup, or what is it?
The real World Cup, yes, Rugby World Cup.
Okay, who do you want to win?
New Zealand, baby.
Okay. Do you have your former intelligence? Do you have any sway? Can you put some money to get them to win?
Well, I got them to beat Italy yesterday, 96 to 17. So.
Right. So Tony Wilson says, "Are you familiar with the links between Putin and the far-right Nazi Russian imperial movement?"
Is that the one that he'd sent over to some weird Nordic country to help train some of the far-right people, and then he also deployed them in Africa? There are several groups. I'm not sure if it's that one exactly. Vice News did a pretty good story on it. It's Putin's secret neo-Nazi army. There's several of these groups. If that's the one I'm thinking about, I know a little bit about them, not a whole lot, but so I'm glad you brought that up. Everybody should watch that Vice News video about these basically the growing neo-Nazi movement in Russia, since Putin and the Kremlin likes to use that as an excuse to why they came into Ukraine. There's a massive problem in Russia as well. In fact, yes, just like the poster said there, Putin and the Kremlin has direct ties to him. So how ironic is that?
Well, the name Wagner is, if anyone is wondering why that doesn't sound very Slavic or Russian, is because he's I think Austrian or German Nazi. It was composer. That was like the favorite of the Nazi commander.
The founder. I heard that the founder of Wagner, which it wasn't Prigozhin, I forget the guy's name. The original founder.
Dmitry Wagner. Oh no, his nickname was Wagner.
Yeah. It wasn't Utkin. That was
Utkin. It was Utkin.
Was it Utkin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I read one time that he named it Wagner because of his love of the Third Reich and Karl Wagner, which is funny because Utkin had the SS lightning bolts tattooed on his collarbone.
So he was an actual Nazi. Yeah.
Nothing like sending a guy with SS lightning bolts into Ukraine to help denazify Ukraine.
Yeah. So here's the truth: is every military in the world has far right ultra nationalists. I'm sure in the U.S. you see some guys who are like, yeah, America, fuck everyone, America's the best. Right? In Canada, you'll have it. And I guarantee that Russia has way more far-right nationalists than every other country.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about the historical context of the Nazi alignment over here? Like, why?
What?
So, okay, so I will say this, and then please let me explain. Ukrainians are one of the few people that I will give a pass to for aligning with the Nazis. And let me explain why. When the Nazis came across the border in 1941, Ukraine had a choice. And we talked about this as well. So do you stick with these people who've been oppressing you for over 400 years?
Russians.
The Russians. And by the way, you live through Holodomor, where they starved 7 or 8 million Russian farmers to death, and they've been doing things like that throughout history. So do you stay with these people, or do you align with this new group who all you know is they hate Russians? So they saw the Nazis as liberators from Russia. Now, mind you, they came across the border in 1941. We didn't find out about the concentration camps until after liberation, so they didn't know anything about this. So it's kind of shitty for us to pass judgment on an impossible choice that a group of people had to make 85 years ago. When we have the gift of hindsight, we will never have to go through that. So the reason, I understand why they did it. I mean, they had an impossible choice. The problem is people don't like to acknowledge that, because if you acknowledge that, like, okay, I understand. So then you have to face the question, in the current situation, if you believe that, Ukraine is full of Nazis, if you believe that, then between Russia and the Nazis now, just what if Nazis are the good guys? And I don't mean the Nazis are Hitler's, I mean the Nazis people you are calling Nazis in Ukraine, and nobody wants to make that admission. What ticks me off really bad, go read after World War II when Russia left Berlin, read about the rape of Berlin, the same tactics they use in Bucha and Irpin, Hostomel. They're doing the same thing that the Nazis did back in World War II, and I don't understand as a society why we are hyper fixated on this 6-year period of time, 1939, 1945, and yes, I know the Nazi Party existed a little bit before that, but I mean when they physically were killing people. Why are we hyper fixed on this 6-year period of time when Russia gets a pass for 400 years of atrocities? Like, you're never going to hear me say Nazis are good people. That's not what I meant. I hope I explained that. I'm saying whenever we should look at the Russians the same way we look at Nazis. And that's, so I don't understand why they get a pass for 400 years of atrocities.
I don't know why we give. I mean, first off, very well said. I'm glad you spoke about that. I don't understand why we give Russia a pass for anything they're doing. Like, it's that phrase. It's like the kettle calling the pot black.
Yeah.
I feel like everything Russia does is they first will accuse Ukraine of doing it, even if there's zero truth in it, and then they actually do it themselves.
Well, I mean, isn't that what we're seeing? They're blaming Ukraine for kidnapping children, yet it's the international court to put the arrest warrant out for Putin because it was Russia that was kidnapping children. So, yeah, I mean.
So, what do you think of is it the senator saying, basically just repeating Russian propaganda, saying, Ukraine is stealing kids' livers?
This was it 2 days ago? Marjorie Taylor Greene. She said Ukraine is one of the worst places on the earth for human trafficking. They're kidnapping people and harvesting children's organs. And this is what we were talking about at the beginning of the stream. When you have elected officials repeat that, Kremlin propaganda, that's scary. I think those are ethics violations. I think those should be ethics investigations. You can Google it. You can see there was Canadian intelligence actually put out a report last year. There's been no evidence that you're harvesting children's organs. And then just last week or last month, here pretty recently, there was a report put out by one of the international watchdogs that there's no evidence that Ukraine is harvesting children's organs. So that's pretty scary when we have our own elected politicians repeating this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, first off, we can't let her get away with spreading misinformation, and because here's the biggest problem is when misinformation is spread, real lives are affected here.
Yeah, absolutely.
People actually die because aid is withheld or something slows down because morons who want political sway or political power or to incite some kind of emotion from the other side. When people had argued about stupid things and made up things in the past before this war, I let it go because I'm like, it doesn't affect me or anyone I care. If people want to talk crap on the internet, let them be trolls. But now it's actually affecting people, real people that I've met. I've looked in their eyes. I've seen them suffer, and I'm like, we can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, I fully agree. I guess I'll throw this name out there. I don't really care at this point. You hear a lot of politicians in the States say, no more money going to Ukraine without oversight. All this money and stuff's going out, and there's no oversight at all. There is oversight. Back when we talked about the National Defense Authorization Act, FY23 NDAA mandated that Department of Defense, Department of State, and USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, Inspector Generals all had to conduct oversight reports and accountability reports. They've been doing that. If the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Makarova, if you go to her Facebook page and you go down to August 18th, you'll see where she talks about the accountability report she does in concert with like USAID Inspector General, and she submits these reports to Congress. So when you have elected officials come out and say, we're giving all this money with no accountability, that's not true. That's simply not true. 60 Minutes did a report about a month ago, and it just aired 3 or 4 days ago. I actually put it up on my Facebook page as well. One of the reporters came over here for about 2 or 3 months and did this really good piece of investigative journalism and talked to members of the government here, and they showed them how they were tracking all this, took them into a warehouse that was full of Javelin missiles and said, there's select people in the US government that have access to this database. They can type in a serial number and it will show where this equipment is. So this stuff is going on. So even aside from just repeating Russian propaganda, if we have elected politicians saying things that just aren't true about what's going on over here, I think there needs to be some type of investigation into that. I will also point out the people who say this, none of those politicians have been over here. I'm conservative. I'll go ahead and say that. I'm conservative, but I was very happy to see last year, was it Pelosi, and it was Pelosi, Blumenthal, Lindsey Graham. It was a bipartisan delegation basically, and they all came over here and they all saw firsthand what's going on. And that group, when they went back, they vote usually different from the way the rest of their parties vote because they were actually here and saw firsthand. So I have a lot of respect for reporters and politicians actually come over here and see things firsthand so they know what's going on.
Yeah, 100%. Unlike, I don't, who's this person? I'm glad the moderators are getting rid of her now. Melissa Noble in the chat keeps pulling up things saying, yeah, but there was an article in 2016 about Ukraine's child trafficking. And here's the problem is, it doesn't mean it's never happened before. What I'm saying is, in 2023, it's not a problem. It's not a big problem. Every country, unfortunately, has some human trafficking, even in the U.S.
The U.S. actually, that last report I saw come out, did I read the U.S. is the largest country for child trafficking?
And it's unfortunate. And all these things, all these issues should be addressed. But first off, it's not a reason to stop supporting Ukraine and let Russia kidnap thousands of children, which they've actually done.
So people tend to say things like, why should we support Ukraine as corrupt? Like, look, you're talking about the government of Ukraine, and Johnny, what he's just bringing up, is talking about supporting the people here. They were invaded by a country, they didn't deserve it, they're being indiscriminately killed, families are being ripped apart. So you have to be able, and this is where I look at things apolitically, you have to be able to separate the government from the people. So if you look at things apolitically and you look at it from like a humanitarian perspective, you're not, yes, you're helping the government of Ukraine, but you're helping the people here by helping the government of Ukraine.
Yeah. And the thing is, you know what, even if you don't care about people, and it's unfortunate, I think one of the reasons why we should help just everyday average people is because we're in a position where we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it or not, the U.S. is a very strong, rich country, and if the U.S. wasn't the peacekeeper or the top military strength, another country would replace us. And I can't think of any other country, because the U.S. definitely isn't perfect, but I can't think of another country I would rather have police in the world and have that power. And unfortunately, if the U.S. isn't on the top, someone else is going to fight for it.
Yeah, and this goes back, we talked about people get upset, like, oh, we're feeding the military-industrial complex. Well, that military-industrial complex allows you to sleep peacefully at night. Look at what the U.S. has. People from all over the world are trying to come across the borders of the U.S. every day because it's a better life. They're not going there because they think it's a horrible place. So look at the things we have as far as advancements in technology, our military, science, our educational systems. You don't think other countries wouldn't want that? What keeps us from being invaded? That's that military-industrial complex. So, you know, people who live in I would say not just the U.S. You know, I lived in Germany for 15 years before I came here. Germany is a great country as well. Germany's a safe country. Why? Because it's in NATO. You know, so people who were fortunate to grow up in Western countries, you know, you sleep peacefully at night. You know, and that's not how it is here. And it's for me, it's very difficult to explain. You know, you don't know if you're going to wake up the next day because, I mean, we see drones and missiles come flying here all the time. Last Wednesday, I woke up, you know, my building's shaking. And that's the other thing, too, we talked about. You know, people's lives go on here, and they have to. People can't just hide in the basements. But at any day, any time, that could be snuffed out like that.
Yeah, 100%. Scorman, thank you very much. Thank you, Johnny and Scott. Before this war, before this invasion, I was under the assumption or hoping that the world now is a civilized place. You know, there's enough food, water, and, you know, for really everyone, every man, woman, and child on the planet. Some countries have more of an abundance than others, but in general, there's no reason for a country to invade another anymore. You know, borders have, you know, are pretty much established now in the world. We've had, you know, I understand why thousands of years ago people were fighting for resources and borders. I really thought those days were over.
Yeah, the age of conquest is over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, now my eyes have opened. I realize it will never end. And the only reason why it stops is because another country is strong enough to say, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we go back to that rules-based order. You know, you have, if you don't follow the rules, you know, basically the moral fabric of society starts to unravel. And, you know, with you know, Putin and Russia, you know, slinging these nuclear threats around, that's got me a little uneasy. I grew up in the Cold War era, and, you know, everybody knew there was the nuclear deterrent, I guess. So that was the big fear. You know, will Russia launch nukes? Will the U.S. launch nukes? But nobody talked about it. They didn't actually use the word nukes. They weren't openly threatening people like they do now. So that's a that's a new one on me. I saw somebody ask about Sarah Ashton Carrillo, what I thought or what we thought about her. Do you know who that is? Yeah, I don't know her. I know who you're talking about. I can say when she first came over here, and I've never met her. When she first came over here and was just trying to do the regular reporting, you can go back and look and find some of her videos up. I personally didn't think she was a very good reporter. I didn't like her style. Like I said, I've never met the person. I know who you're talking about. The one she was just fired as she was the spokesperson for the territorial defense, right? So yeah, I don't really know enough about her personally to be able to comment though. Johnny walked out. Let's see, what do we have here? You trust Zelensky to police the world? Yeah, you know, it's funny because we see a lot of people, and like I said, I'm conservative, and I see in conservative circles, you know, radio shows and stuff like that, people trying to badmouth Zelensky, and I don't understand why. You know, he did what we would hope a leader would do. You know, he didn't run when we offered him a ride. He said, "I don't need a ride, I need bullets." You know, he ran. Is Zelensky perfect? No. I don't talk about Ukrainian politics. They're extremely difficult to understand. But Zelensky did run on an anti-corruption platform. One of the things he did that his predecessor didn't do, Poroshenko, is he installed anti-corruption judges to the court. They've had how many different anti-corruption investigations, and they've arrested people. And, you know, people point like, see, it's corrupt. I'm like, so him conducting, you know, anti-corruption raids and implementing law is a sign of corruption. It looks to me like it's a sign of him trying to root corruption out. So I'm not sure why so many people are out trying to give Zelensky a bad name.
Yeah. Ukraine, you know, you always hear this, like, Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. And that's only because Russia's not in Europe.
Yeah.
Russia's the most corrupt country.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Russia is a country being ran by a criminal gang. That's, you know, they estimate that Putin is probably the richest person in the world. Estimated he stole around 300 billion, has stolen around 300 billion from the Russian people. I'll just estimate, you know, but yeah, it's pretty scary. And, you know, so we talked this the other day a little bit too. To understand corruption here, it's not kind of like it is in the U.S. A lot of the corruption, and I'm not talking about necessarily in government, I'm just talking about in society itself. Under the Soviet Union especially, it was done out of necessity. I dated a girl here a couple of years ago, and she was telling me that under the Soviet Union, her dad was a high-ranking military official, and her mom was a professor at the state university. And on the weekends, they would go out to this field where they had a little plot of land, and they would tend the garden so they would have enough vegetables and food to eat because they didn't hardly make any money. That's sad because, you look in the States, what a high-ranking military official and a professor at a state university make pretty good living. We talked about this as well. I think a lot of things changed, maybe not necessarily in the government, but in society with President Poroshenko here when he restructured the military, gave them raises, and especially the police department. Prior to, I had people live here tell me like police officers couldn't live on their salaries, so they would have to pull people over, try to get them for bribes and things like that. So a lot of it was done out of necessity. When it comes to politicians, I forgot, I read, it wasn't Zelensky, it was when Poroshenko was president. I read what he made, and like the presidents, they don't make that much over here. But I did have somebody tell me one time, like even in the military, you get to a certain point and like, and you almost max out on money, and if you need to make any more money, you kind of have to turn to corruption. Same thing with politicians. I think a lot of that in society is changing now with the IT crowd especially. You've got a lot of young people here going to school, getting spun up on IT. A lot of international companies are outsourcing that IT work here, paying higher salaries, and it's started to create a middle class here, which is something that I'm not 100% sure has ever really existed in Ukraine. So I think it's a generational thing. I think these changes that Zelensky is implementing now and the future generations, upcoming generations, I think Ukraine is making strides towards rooting out corruption.
Yeah, and we have to remember most of that corruption was left over from being occupied by Russia. That's where they got the corruption. And now that they're looking towards the West, even before this war, they've been trying to get rid of corruption for the last 5 or 6 years. So let's help them do it. Let's not, slap them on the wrist saying, because you're not perfect yet, we're not going to help you.
Yeah.
Audience asked, what do we feel about Ukrainian women in the medical fields being required to register for military service? Have you heard about this? So I think it was starting today, actually, October 1st.
Yeah.
Women who are in, doctors, nurses, anyone who's in medical, it's not that they are automatically sent to the front line, but I think they can be conscripted.
Like they have to register for selective service like we do in the States. I mean, so yeah, I see people argue about, and this isn't necessarily to do with the medical field, but in the States, people say, hey, if you're all for equality, then why don't women have to register for selective service? So I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, I certainly have no problem with women, here out on the front lines, in the States. I still see people argue online about not wanting women in combat roles. We've got women out here on the front line, especially some of the snipers. They're good. I follow several units out here on Telegram, watch them live stream. We have women on the front lines over here. I certainly don't have a problem with it. Making it mandatory, that's a little, I don't know, that's a tough one. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I understand. Under normal circumstances, I would say, no, that's not a nice thing to do, right? But during war and actually during an invasion, especially, I think it was the other way. If Ukraine was invading Russia, and then they wanted a mandatory conscription or not recruitment. What do you call it? Like a wave of mobilization. I would be 100% against it. But when you're defending your land, and it's your choice of either fighting or dying, I actually am surprised that Ukraine doesn't mobilize more people, including women. We live in a day and age now where gender is supposed to be equal now. If they can help, don't send them to the front line, but if they can help medical fields or in hospitals, why not?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people have asked me why they closed the borders and they won't let people out, military age males. Like, look, there's a war going on. Who's going to defend the country? And I would hope, in my home country, if we were invaded, people would be lining up to defend too, and not run away. So.
Yeah, and actually, I think even more than that, if everybody leaves, including the men, the economy collapses. And we forget that when the economy isn't working, Ukraine can't produce what it needs. And to be able to defend itself. You know, you also need people to produce food, energy. You need workers. So, you know, for every one person on the front line, they say you need something like 7 people in the country, you know, working normal jobs or supporting in some way. Yeah. So, guys, if you have any questions, please let us know, because I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Was there any kind of big ones that we missed, you think?
Another one I get asked, propaganda. I was thinking talking points. Propaganda. What did I hear the other day? The last time Tucker Carlson interviewed Colonel McGregor, McGregor came out and said, you know, we estimate Ukrainian deaths at 400,000. Of course, he didn't say who we was, because I don't know who he's talking about. No Western military or intelligence service has that estimate. I think Institute for the Study of War just put out another estimate, and they estimated 500,000 for both Ukraine and Russia. That's to include KIA, wounded in action, and civilians. So nobody out there thinks that 400,000 is you know, Ukrainian losses are at 400,000.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it actually doesn't matter what the losses are. Ukraine is going to fight to the end. Russia is taking way more losses just from their style of fighting.
The human way of, you know,
Yeah.
I did a yeah, I guess I can talk about this. I did a 75-day tour at SAGU. It's the Security Assistance Group in Ukraine. This is a unit in Germany that's a U.S.-led unit that's overseeing all the equipment coming in. And I was there as like a consultant liaison for 75 days, and used to talk to the intelligence officer, Ukrainian intelligence officers and staff out in Donbass every day, and we get these reports back. And some of the stuff they were telling me that the Russians were doing is just like, it was insane, you know, just running at them in waves. The person would go down in front of them. They would send a person with a gun and a picker behind them. So when that person went down, the person behind them would pick up the gun and keep going. Just stuff that, like, literally World War I trench warfare type thing. It doesn't even follow Russian military doctrine. So, and it's pretty scary if Putin's willing to just waste lives like that. You know, what's his end state?
Yeah, and that's, you know, Russian lives. So unfortunately, that's just the way he is. And this is why Ukraine needs to win. Today is Ukraine Defender Day. So, Dyakuyu, Hodom Slava, to all the Ukrainian defenders out there, both the Ukrainians, obviously, but also the volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, there's definitely lots of foreigners out here, but they're all volunteers. There's no mercenaries. In fact, it's a joke between all of them that if they wanted to make money, they wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I see that too. Oh, they're mercenaries. They're going there for a paycheck, and I'm like, do you know what? Back on I had a well, no, I don't want to talk about like how much the military gets paid, but yeah, they're not here for the money.
Yeah, there's a lot more wars in the world where they can make a lot more money, and here it's like, I mean, I know a lot of ex-military guys who are volunteers. And I'll guarantee all of them are just like, you know, if I have enough for a beer on the weekend or some like a nice dinner or something, like I'm happy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey,
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you guys for watching. And if you have any other questions that we didn't answer, you can leave it in the comments below, and we'll get to you.
Oh, can I,
Andre. Thank you. Dyakuyu.
Can I bug them for?
Yeah.
Guys, I need subscribers.
Oh yeah, please.
So as I'm doing my thesis and I'm doing my deep dive on research on propaganda and stuff, I'd like to kind of maybe start putting out polling and stuff like that, asking some questions from the international community as well. So in the description of this video, Johnny's got my profile. That's Midwest Traveler. If you don't mind, please subscribe, and also please share this video on all your social media platforms to try to get this out there, information out there. I mean, like I said, I could literally talk about this for hours. There's so much propaganda out there, it's crazy. But the only way to counter propaganda is to put the truth out there. So.
Yeah, and we're doing our part. We're fighting for the truth in Ukraine where we can. And so if you guys start hearing some BS from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, this is your cue to share this video to counter it. Thank you so much. And we've left the link to his channel in the chat and below. So see you guys next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye bye.